Within the show of Ninjago, you will find that Garmadon is one of, if not the most popular character that we have seen throughout the course of the show. I don't think that comes as any surprise, because he is one of the most fascinating characters we have ever had, and he's got the entertainment aspect, he's got the intimidation aspect, he has got absolutely everything you want in a character. But Garmadon has gone through many different incarnations over the course of the show. He has taken on many different aesthetics, and he has also had many different allegiances, and that is what I want to talk about today. Because since Garmadon has been resurrected, the question has always been, will we ever see him return to his good form that we saw before in the show? And I actually think you're not going to expect my answer to that question. So, let me not waste any more of your time, and let's talk about whether Garmadon will ever become good. Now, to get this out of the way, in terms of the physical aspect of Garmadon, do I think we'll ever see him back in his Season 3 or Season 4 look? No. I think that is long gone, and I don't think we'll ever see that version of Garmadon return in any capacity. Simply put, the version of him that we currently see is just simply too iconic. It is also the design that we get to see in the movie, and we've also get to see Garmadon develop his powers within this form. So I don't think they're ever going to get rid of this form when it comes to Garmadon. So I don't think we're going to ever get the good looking version of him once more. But that doesn't remove a very important aspect of Garmadon that I really don't think a lot of people have acknowledged, and this is the entire basis of what I'm going to be talking about, because I don't think Garmadon will ever return to a good form in the physical aspect, but I think mentally speaking, he's honestly almost there. And the crazy thing as well is the fact that I also don't think this is a new development. I don't think Crystallized specifically has caused Garmadon to become more good. Of course, I will talk about Crystallized Garmadon, but that is for later in the video. But I honestly think Garmadon secretly was a bit more further along than we realized from the literal point of his resurrection. There is a line from Season 8 that I have always found a bit weird, and I have never really seen anyone actually acknowledge the line that he actually said. This is in one of the most iconic fights as well from the show itself, his battle against Lloyd in the episode True Potential. There is a line he said during that battle that literally never made any sense to me, and I'm going to say it off verbatim. He said, "I have played many roles. I have worn many masks. Father, husband, brother, teacher, but only one was summoned back. Destroyer." I don't really think I've ever actually seen anyone acknowledge this line apart from how cool it is, but I think the deeper meaning of this line goes a lot further than we have actually realized. I think a lot of people took this line as Garmadon basically saying that the old version of him was not within his body, and honestly, I don't think that is true by any stretch of the imagination. I think the line is its literal taking. The implication is that he has worn many masks, and father, husband, brother, and teacher was simply a facade, and the real one is actually the Destroyer. And I really do not believe this whatsoever. I think Destroyer is the fake mask. So why would he be proclaiming that father, husband, brother, and teacher are all fakes and they are not truly who Garmadon actually is? Because I don't believe for a second Garmadon doesn't have his memory, because he's acknowledging his past life, but the fact is that he is still proclaiming that they are masks. And I think that is literally what it is. I think in the quite literal sense, this line needs to be taken at face value. I think Garmadon is saying outright that those masks are simply the ones that never actually returned and the Destroyer did. Because the form that Garmadon is in this season is the Destroyer form, and we never saw him as essentially the father, husband, brother, or teacher within this form. Of course, obviously, Season 1 exists, and the evil version of Garmadon still acts like a father, but in reality, that was never the true face of Garmadon, and it was only until Season 3 and 4 where he truly acted like those other masks. But acknowledging this point of, he is literally stating that the old form of him is no longer within him, and that's why I believe the old form of Garmadon can't come back, I honestly went into a bit of a further spiral when I was thinking of this line. Because if the physical aspect of him is not there, why is he actually acknowledging it? Of course it's to intimidate Lloyd, don't get me wrong, but I do think there's more to it than we actually acknowledge. I think Garmadon, in a literal sense, is acknowledging that he knew who he was in his past life. But the thing is that obviously he does try to act that he doesn't remember it. But I think he's lying. Garmadon is no stranger to lying, we know that for a fact. It is much more evolved, his much more calm in nature and crystallized, he still lies. Of course, he acts like he's talking about Christopher in multiple occasions, when in reality he's actually talking about Lloyd. So we know Garmadon is a liar, so the much more primal, the much more aggressive version of him also wouldn't be a stranger to that. So that is why I do believe he does actually have his memories. I don't think Garmadon lost his memories when he was resurrected. I think he simply knows too much to not be able to remember what he actually was. So I think there's a different aspect of him that was controlling him in this moment. Obviously, one of those things was Harumi. That's quite obvious to say. Obviously, Harumi needed Garmadon to be a very specific ideal so she could achieve her plan. But I do think the simple fact that he was resurrected was honestly just him basically turning on his brain. I think that kind of explains why he acts how he does in Season 8. I think he is literally trying to get his body working again, considering that he was recently dead. I think Garmadon is honestly just trying to figure himself out once more. And I do think that's backed up by the fact that when he's initially resurrected, his voice is much more slurred, it's much more drowsy, it's much more off almost. It doesn't sound like Garmadon. But of course, the longer that he was alive, the more his voice returned. Almost like his body was basically switching back on. But once that actually does happen, we realize that Garmadon does get his memories back, and that leads us into how we actually get to see him throughout the rest of the Oni trilogy. Season 10 in particular is the most interesting one because we know for a fact that Garmadon was clearly struggling with his own emotions, and we actually get this acknowledged outright by Omega, because he acknowledges the fact that Garmadon is attempting to understand what is around him when an Oni typically shouldn't. So if Garmadon was truly only the destroyer, and that was all that was actually within his brain, why could Omega sense conflict? Because Garmadon, I don't really believe that he could have just simply regrown his memories, or he could have learned compassion basically just through learning what his previous life was. I think it goes without saying that Garmadon very clearly had to have those previous memories, which is why that line in Season 8 has to be wrong. Or like I said, simply taken into a different context. I just think it goes without saying that Garmadon very clearly cannot be in the state that he describes himself in Season 8 without acknowledging who he was before and without acknowledging the clear conflicts that he did have within him. And does that mean that he's trying to be good within the Oni trilogy? I would honestly say yes. I mean, a lot of people think he's just trying to be good and crystallize, but I do think it begins in the Oni trilogy. I mean, in Season 10 alone, he does things that he perceives to be the right thing. He's doing what he believes is right, but he's also trying to acknowledge that he's trying to do the right thing at the exact same time. His entire fight with the Oni proves that he's trying to be more than he's actually being presented as. And I do think the final scene of him convincing himself to do Spinjitzu to be a part of the tornado is him fully realizing that he needs to be good once more. And obviously the whole point is that Lloyd is the catalyst for all that. I think it's fascinating because I don't think many people realize that he's truly trying to be better in the Oni trilogy. The scene, in my opinion, that really solidifies the fact that Garmadon is trying to be good is the scene with Vinny from the episode The Fall. And may I add, this is one of my favourite scenes in all of Ninjago. So Garmadon is looking at a photo of himself in his past life. He's not acknowledging it as something that he doesn't remember, he's acknowledging it as something that he should be curious about. And then Vinny walks in, and then Garmadon asks him a very important question, which is what could possibly be more important than survival? And Vinny's answer truly does change his perception. Remember, Garmadon at this point in time, even though I do believe he's trying to be good, he is still very clearly being driven by his more Oni side and still by Harumi's influence. But as he's attempting to break through it, he gets an answer that he truly never expected. Vinny's answer was, well, lots of things. Friendship, man, and love, and harmony, and trust and truth, and courage, and you know, all the things that makes life worthwhile. Without those, I mean, what's the point, right? And that truly does change Garmadon's perception. If I believe Garmadon was trying to be good beforehand, I do believe this scene in particular is what fully pushes Garmadon to try more. And obviously Crystallize does prove that fact, but I'm just using it as backing for the fact that the Oni trilogy is definitely also showing Garmadon trying to be good. But Garmadon realizes that the Destroyer simply isn't a persona that you could live comfortably off of. I do believe that he was lying about the rest of him not being in there. I just simply think he didn't want that side to come out. But I think he realizes that that side of him is truly what really kept him going. And then that of course leads us into Crystallize, and it kind of shows us Garmadon's journey outright, so I'm going to be quite brief with the Crystallize crystallized section, but like I said, Garmadon is learning more to care about the people around him, and in particular Lloyd, and that is basically all because of Christopher. And I mean, he's attempting again to do the right things, he's not destroying, he's not giving in to his more Oni nature, he readopts the teacher mantle, he readopts the brother mantle, the father mantle in a lot of different ways. I mean, the final scene of Garmadon handing Lloyd words to be able to rebuild the monastery, I think is so much more emotionally significant than we actually realize, but that's a whole nother thing in of itself, and that's going to be for my Garmadon analysis. But the fact is that it really does show that Garmadon was truly trying to be good, and like I said, crystallized, the whole point was Garmadon was trying to be good. But that is why I wanted to also show that the Oni trilogy Garmadon was still trying to do the same thing. It was just simply much more subtle. But with this entire journey that Garmadon has been taking, does this mean that in the end, at the end of this road, will he truly be good once more? Yes. But not in the state that you may think. I don't think he's going to become infallibly good, he's going to become Master Garmadon, he's going to become what we saw in Season 3 and 4. I believe what we're going to see is a version of Garmadon that is actually quite emotionally complex. Of course, this does also rely that we will get Garmadon within Dragon's Rising, and I do think it's a no-brainer that they will get him back in at some point. I just think they're having a lot of fun with him in the comics at the minute. But I do believe that Garmadon will become a very complex character that is something that we have never seen with him. I think we're going to see a version of Garmadon that does realize that his emotions do matter, and he realizes that those emotions are real, and those other masks are the true version of Garmadon and not the actual destroyer side of him. But that doesn't mean he's not going to be the same type of Garmadon that we've seen. I believe even though Garmadon will become much more good, I do believe for one he will maintain his Oni form, and I also believe that he will maintain the anger that he feels within. I don't think Garmadon can ever be a truly good character again because of the nature of how he was resurrected. Of course, he was resurrected using the power of the Oni, which I think inherently is just not really a good thing. You take him more into the destruction side of the creation and destruction aspect. But I think it's going to be a version of Garmadon that is truly fighting through those emotions, and he's going to be trying his best to actually do good within the world. And like I said, that doesn't mean he's going to become completely good. Just simply that hybrid of himself, and I think that hybrid will truly make for an interesting character, because if we can harness a version of Garmadon that is good towards his son, and is helpful, and does his best for the people of Ninjago, whilst also still being susceptible to anger and all the downsides that he picked up through the course of the Oni trilogy and crystallized, I do think that would be an interesting version of him. And I do think that would make for the most complex and the most interesting version of Garmadon that we could ever see. Do I think it will happen? Probably not. I think this more crystallized version of Garmadon is going to stick around if we get Garmadon back. But I do believe that Garmadon could have the capacity to be good in a very interesting way. And I think the way I've just described would be the perfect way of doing that. But that is my theory as to how or if Garmadon could actually become good again. And also why I believe that Oni Trilogy Garmadon was also on the same arc, just not as outright in your face. And the backing on how I believe that. And also why I think that fight with Lloyd, that one line about the many masks, was not the way that we initially conceived it. But what do you think of what I have said today? Do you agree with what I've said about Garmadon? Do you disagree? Do you wish Garmadon would remain evil? Do you want him to become good? Did you want a fully good Garmadon again like we saw in Season 3 and 4? Honestly, I'm very curious because Garmadon, for being such a popular character, there are so many people who have different versions and different ideals when it comes to him. And that is why I'm curious to know what you guys think. But that is about it for today, you guys. Thank you very much for watching, and take care. Okay, bye!